reflect on the so-called refugee crisis, because I don't actually like using the word crisis, because if there is a crisis, it's a crisis of management of movement of people. The refugees are not a crisis. They might be in crisis, but they're themselves not the crisis. But I'm also thinking that, in all this sort of heat of all these debates, that we are not really taking a long-term, more historical perspective on those debates, because one of the sort of things that are repeated over and over and over is that this is the largest refugee crisis that Europe has ever experienced. Well, post World War II, there were 10 million displaced people, so and the population of Europe was much smaller. So both proportionately and in actual numbers, that crisis, if we want to use that term, was much larger. Somehow we managed it in sort of a policy vacuum, right? Because this is the Convention on the Refugee Status, definitely pre-protocol, and yet the so-called international regime, the refugee regime, what became a refugee regime later on, managed. That's one thing to kind of remember, that this is unfortunately not for the first time. And I'm not so sure, whether it's for the last time. And then I think sitting in Central Europe, the center of Central Europe, and also reflecting on my own home country, because I come from Poland, those two countries have always been refugee-producing countries. In the U.S., where I now work and live, we usually give the Hungarian resettlement of the 56ers as the sort of, the golden standard of how well people have been received and how well people had done. And if you really looked at some of the 56ers, we've had quite good citizens out of that. So that's, for Hungary. For Poland, there were many more ways. I myself went to the U.S. seeking refuge in the early 1980s, the post-Solidarity, and during the martial law, or post-martial law immediately. So we have always been, from both countries, we have always been refugees, always looking to somebody else to give us the leg up, to welcome us, and to not to shy away from responsibilities, but also wanting rights and participation in those societies. And somehow I'm very dismayed that kind of a culture is disappearing. In Poland also, I am remembering that when we were fleeing during the war, many Muslim countries welcomed us. So many Poles were in Northern Africa, many Poles were in Iran, and somehow we obviously were not Muslim, we were Catholic. Somehow the Muslims didn't think that just by having a different religion, we are the other that should not be allowed to come for respite or to come and stay. When you look at where there's the Polish or Hungarian diaspora these days, almost there's no place on the map where we're not at, right? So that means that we stayed, that means that we integrated, that means that the cultural, religious, whatever differences were really not obstacles. The other question that I have, and I'm doing a little bit of research on, I don't have the answers for that yet, but I'm thinking of, to what extent Orban or, Duda and Kaczyński in Poland are saying, well, we are only doing what the people want us to do. So I'm trying to understand, well, are they just using this? Or is the population really supporting these kind of harsh things. And so I talked to somebody at one of the human rights organizations here, and he said something that I find very contradictory, and in my own mind I cannot quite reconcile it, because on one hand he said, Hungarians are so individualistic, they're very selfish, they only think about themselves. Well, that does not quite jive with the nationalistic sentiments, right? In my definition, nationalism is a group activity. So I'm not quite sure how to reconcile the two, and whether, really Hungarians are tired, want to think about their own economics and that kind of stuff, and don't want to have anything to do with the politics, but the government interprets it as, they worry about their own livelihoods, so we cannot be enforcing on them other people. But I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle of all of this.